Greetings, traveler. You have arrived in London in the winter of 1790. We must keep our voices down so as not to disturb the extraordinary event we are about to witness. This is a luxurious coffee house. Fine and noble people are gathered here this dark winter evening. We hear the rustling of clothes, the faint murmur of anticipation, and the crackling from the fireplace that keeps the cold of winter at bay. We observe a man most peculiar, dressed in the finest clothing in accordance with the latest fashion. He sits calmly at a large table in the center of the room. But it is not the fine silk or his golden buttons that draws all eyes to him. It is just a simple piece of cloth that makes the attention of everyone present gravitate towards him, as if he were the sun and we were all celestial bodies trapped by an unseen force from which we cannot escape. A simple piece of cloth, and the fact that he is wearing it over his eyes as a blindfold. Resting on the table in front of this curious man are 3 chess sets with pieces meticulously carved from rosewood. This is a man whose praise has been sung by Voltaire, by Rousseau. It used to be that the aristocracy, even kings and queens, would bestow him with gifts and invite him to their balls, for a party was never truly a success if not François-André Danican Philidor was there. But not anymore. The peculiar man with the blindfold, the man nobody can take their eyes off, is a fugitive. You see, there has been a revolution in his country of France, a revolution that does not look kindly on men such as him, and therefore he has fled here to London. Friends and supporters of this man has arranged tonight's event to raise money so that he may continue living in the style to which he is accustomed. François-André Danican Philidor is famous as a composer and musician, but it is not on the black and white keys of the piano that he will display his genius for us tonight. No, he will demonstrate his superb skill in another medium entirely, the black and white squares of the chessboard. 3 men sit down to play the blindfolded genius. Off to the side, some spectators quietly sign affidavits to testify that they are witnessing this singular event. In our time, my friend, blindfold chess is an accepted art form, but you must understand that before tonight, something like this has never been done before. In one of the 3 games, Philidor has black against the distinguished and noble Captain Andrew Smith, and it is on that particular brilliant game we will focus. And we can sit here quietly off to the side, and I will show and explain each move as they are being played. Enjoy the game, my friend. And now I see the game begins. The noble Captain Andrew Smith of the Queen's Fleet opens up the game with pawn to e4, establishing a pawn in the center and attacking 2 important squares in the center on black's side of the board. Philidor responds immediately and calls out the the move pawn to e5, which is completed on the board by his assistant. Captain Andrew Smith plays bishop, as we can see, to c4. The bishop's opening is what this is called, and it's attacking f7. This attack is ignored by Philidor, who we can see calls out the move knight to f6. This attacks the pawn on e4. In order to protect the pawn, we see Mr. Captain Smith play pawn to d3, protecting the e4 pawn. In response to this, we see pawn to c6. A beautiful move that shows the deep and novel chess understanding of François-André Danican Philidor. In his world-famous book on chess, Philidor says that if he is to be remembered for only one thing, he wished to be remembered for his idea that pawns, although the weakest pieces on the chessboard, are the most important, for their formation and the way they are arranged draws the map of the battlefield, or as he puts it, pawns are the soul of chess. No such understanding by his opponent, who instead plays a more superficial move with bishop to g5, pinning this knight to the queen. You notice this knight cannot move, as the queen would be lost. Unfazed, we see an immediate reply as Philidor calls out the move pawn to h6, attacking the bishop, asking a question of this piece. Captain Smith answers that question by playing bishop takes knight on f6, like so. And was that a sly smile I saw crawl over the face of the French genius? He wastes no time, at least, in calling out his response. Queen takes f6. Knight to c3 by the noble captain, looking at d5, which has been prepared by Philidor. So now we have a pawn, a bishop, and a knight all defending against this advance. But what is that? A different pawn advance is tried. Pawn to b5 with an attack on the bishop. The bishop is almost trapped on the light squares, but Captain Smith finds the correct move and drops the bishop back to b3. Pawn to a5 by Philidor. What is this move about? This move, again, is about this bishop. Now you notice these pawns are all controlling the light squares, and the bishop has nowhere to go, meaning that if Philidor is allowed to push this pawn one square further, this bishop will be trapped and probably forced to give itself up for this pawn, resulting in a losing position for white. Let's see. It looks like Captain Smith is having a bit of a think, but now he calls out the response. And luckily for us, he plays pawn to a3. So he sees the aggressive idea for black and defends against it, giving an escape square to the bishop. Philidor develops his bishop sliding out to c5 with an attack on f2. This could potentially be a very, very strong piece. Knight to f3 is the choice for white, being ready to castle, looking at dark squares in the center and developing the last minor piece. And again, the Frenchman plays a pawn move. Pawn to d6. Of course, solidifying the pawn on e5, defending the bishop, but also, and perhaps more importantly, opening up the bishop on c8. The bishop can now come, for instance, to g4, where it would pin the knight to the queen. What will the response be? Queen to d2, getting out of any potential pin against the knight, so the knight would be able to move if it were pinned. So this is interesting. Philidor here calls out the move bishop to e6, offering a trade of bishops, which I believe is a strong positional idea. And when I say positional, you may not know what that term means. That means that in the long term, this trade will favor black, even though it's two equal pieces being traded. This piece is what Philidor is claiming is more important for white than this piece is for black. The exchange is accepted, and Captain Smith plays bishop takes bishop. How will the French genius respond? Queen takes bishop, or pawn takes bishop. We hear him say, if takes e6. So again, a focus on the pawn structure, the formation of pawns. This pawn and this pawn are now able to support an advance of the d-pawn at any time black wants. The potential for an attack in the center seems to worry Captain Smith a little bit. He plays the prudent move, castles to the king side, getting his king to what looks like relative safety. But immediately we hear Philidor call out an interesting reply. Again, a pawn move. Almost every single pawn has been moved on now. Pawn to g5. Already on move 12, every single pawn has been moved. This pawn is threatening to come to g4 with an attack on the knight, forcing the knight to leave. And we hear pawn to h3 from Captain Andrew Smith, preventing this pawn from coming forward. Knight to d7, developing the last minor piece after having established a very serious control over the board with the pawns. And here, an interesting idea by Captain Smith, a retreating knight move, knight to h2. So this knight wants to have a future on this square right here, where it will attack the queen. this knight is looking at a different square. It has a long-term plan. This knight wants to go here, so it has a route to go here, here, and then here on this square, where it will be looking at the king, these two pawns, and attacking a lot of central or important squares in the castle position of white. But first, we have to deal as black with this move. He seems to be thinking a little bit, the Frenchman. And now we hear the reply, pawn to h5, taking away this square. If the knight comes here, it will simply be captured. Also, this has a threat of pushing pawn to g4, starting to smash open the center. And the reply for white is pawn to g3, so that we can answer pawn to g4 with pawn to h4. Therefore, I don't believe Philidor will play pawn to g4. No, instead, he plays a rather amazing move. Not bothering to castle to the king side, not bothering to castle to the queen side, but instead building his own unique castle in the center by playing king to e7. This, of course, connects the rook. I suspect that the rook on a would like to join its fellow on h, maybe going to g8 with an attack against the king. Also, we have to understand that this bishop is extremely strong looking at this pawn, and on this king here, actually pinning the pawn. What was that? What was the move? King to, yes, okay. So we hear Captain Andrew Smith call out the move king to g2. This makes a lot of sense, as it frees up this pawn. Philidor strikes in the center with pawn to d5. Notice how this move was prepared a long time ago, being extremely well defended by these two pawns. This is, of course, threatening moves in the long term, like pawn takes pawn. Right now it is adequately defended, but the defense freezes white in this position. Therefore, we see pawn to f3, defending this, freeing up the knight and this pawn to strike in the center with a counterattack at a later time. And the knight that started its journey some time ago can now continue. Knight to f8. Remember, this knight wants to come here and ultimately land on this square. Right now this square is, of course, defended by this pawn, but maybe we can soften that square up a bit before we continue our plan as black. Knight goes to e2 for white. This is defending this pawn, it's defending this extremely crucial square, and it is also making it possible for white to play moves like pawn to c3 and strike in the center with pawn to d4. Knight to g6 by Philidor. Pawn to c3 by the noble captain, and rook on a to g8. So you can now notice how every single piece for black is pointing at the white majesty. This could be a recipe for trouble for our dear captain, who in this position, I hear, plays pawn to d4. So this is the plan plan for white, counterattacking in the center. How will Philidor react? Will he play pawn takes pawn? No. He simply plays bishop back to b6. Saying this bishop is very strong and I want it on this diagonal. And white is frozen a little bit. It's very, very hard to figure out, and we can also see a long think from Captain Smith here on what to do, how to develop any sort of plan or counterplay. Okay, here's what he comes up with. Pawn takes pawn on e5. Trying to smash open the center. The reply instantly given by Philidor is queen takes pawn on e5. And now we are allowed to see Captain Smith and his idea. It is knight to d4 coming in with a nasty threat on this now vacated square. The knight is threatening to capture on this square c6, forking the king and the queen and winning the game on the spot. Philidor very calmly calls out the move, king to d7, protecting the pawn. But now it is as if there has come some wind in the sails for the captain. He plays rook on a to d1, preparing perhaps to play pawn takes pawn, exposing an attack from the rook on the queen. This could be very dangerous for black. However, black seems to have a lot of attacking power coming towards the white king, and I suspect that Philidor, when he comes out of his think, will play some sort of aggressive move. Yes, we hear it now. Pawn to h4, threatening a checkmate with queen takes g3, which would be checkmate immediately. So Captain Smith plays queen to f2, defending the square. And without much hesitation, we see the reply, bishop coming to c7, working together with the queen and the pawn, all attacking the pawn here on g3. How can we even defend that pawn? Only one move, and it is what Captain Smith plays. Knight dropping back to e2, defending the square. But this is a masterclass in positional chess. If you will just look at the completely squeezed position of all white's pieces. 2 rooks, 2 knights and a queen, all trying to defend the wall of the castle, where the pawn play of Philidor has allowed a free-flowing attack from his pieces. They are all in the game. They are all pointing at the king, and they have a lot of space to move, all of them. We see the beginning of the end now. H takes g3 with an attack on the queen. The queen captures on g3. we see queen takes queen on g3, voluntarily trading off the strongest piece. Only one legal move. Knight takes queen. So what is the idea? How will Philidor continue the attack without his queen? What is the move? We see how he leans back in his chair. Can you hear the thundering silence of all the noble and fine people in this room, trying to figure out what the next move will be, holding their breath? Knight to f4, check. King to h1. The good captain looks exasperated, and the attack rages on without any sort of hesitation. The Frenchman, the composer, the chess player, the socialite, the fugitive, plays rook takes pawn on h3. This attacks the knight on g3, and it is also getting further into white's position. Desperately, rook to g1 is tried by the good captain, but it seems that our French genius has seen all the way to the end, as he calls out rook takes knight on h2 with check, a forcing move, allowing only one legal reply, which is king takes rook. What is the follow-up? Rook to h8 with check. Notice that the king cannot escape because of the knight, so it looks like it is almost checkmate. However, there is one legal move, which is played knight, blocking the check, coming to h5. Rook takes knight on h5 with check again, and it's not checkmate because after the knight move, the king has access to g3. And what is the finishing touch? Knight to h3. And this is beautiful. Not only is this a discovered check, notice how the bishop is now checking the king. It is also cutting off an escape for the king. The king cannot go to f2. The king can now choose to either go to g2, trying to come in and maybe capture the knight if it captures the rook, or the king can go to g4 with a counterattack on the rook. If we go to g2, black can just play knight takes rook, and either rook takes knight or king takes knight, and white will simply beat down a piece and a pawn for no compensation. Or we can try, okay, so this is what? So that would be a losing position, but I believe this is also losing even more quickly. Captain Smith plays king to g4, thinking maybe if knight takes rook, then he can play king takes rook. But a little smile on Philidor's face as he calls out the final move of the game. Rook to h4, protected by the pawn. The pawn is protected by the knight. The knight is protected by the rook. This square this square is protected by the bishop, and this square is protected by this pawn. This square is protected by the rook, meaning that there are no legal moves for white. There is no way to avoid the capture of the king. And that concludes the game with checkmate. So I will leave you here, my time traveling friend, and wish you all the best adventures on your journey through time. I hope you had a great and relaxing time with me, with Captain Smith, and with France under Danican Philidor here in London in the winter of 1790.